Hi, everybody. We're going to wait just about a minute and then we're going to get you started as quickly as possible. So thanks for coming. Okay, well, I would like to get started since we do have a group here. So hello, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Melissa Cerrone. I am the program manager for the Office of Arts and Culture in the city of Sacramento. And we're going to be talking tonight about the Nonprofit Recovery Program American Rescue Plan Act grants. It's a lot to say. The session's a webinar, so please post all your questions into, I think there's a Q&A here. Take a look or into the chat, and we'll try to answer them all for you before we're done today. And the webinar is also going to be recorded and available on our YouTube channel in about 2 days. And our YouTube channel is under the Sacramento Office of Arts and Culture. And I'm joined here today by my colleague, Diana Rufner, in our office. And we're just going to go over the grant application and particularly the eligibility. I think that's one of the bigger issues that we'll probably want to be talking about tonight. So our agenda is just a brief overview of who we are, the Office of Arts and Culture. If you've never worked with us before, had a grant with us before, I'd like to tell you who we are. We'll go over what the American Rescue Plan Act Recovery Program is and what it's for. We'll go over some of the eligible activities that could be provided under this grant. Spend a lot of time under which organizations are eligible for this grant. I know there might be a little confusion, but it's very specific. So there's specific types of organizations that do meet our eligibility requirements and some that are ineligible just specifically for this grant program. And know that if you are ineligible for this grant program, it doesn't mean that there are not going to be other programs coming down the line, either at the city or from our office in particular. We're going to talk about the documentation that's going to need to go into the grant. So what you're going to have to demonstrate and some things you're going to have to put in this grant application. We'll go through the dates and the deadlines for everything. We'll talk a little bit about how the awards are made and what our contracting process is like. Again, if you've never had a contract or received a grant from the city of Sacramento, there are some things you should know and probably should know even before you apply and start the process. And then we're going to talk about the grant application project. And Diana will then open the grant application so you can actually see what it looks like. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. And I think we've got plenty of time set aside to hopefully answer all your questions. So first of all, who are we? Those of you who may have worked with us in the past may have known us as the Sacramento Metropolitan Arts Commission, or SMAC. In 2018, we underwent a name change and we're now the Office of Arts and Culture. The other difference is we used to be a joint commission of the county and the city, and now we are a city-only agency. We are a division of the Convention and Culture Services Department for the city of Sacramento. Our offices are located in City Hall. And we are, though, the state and local partner for Sacramento County. So the state of California has designated state and local partners. We receive funding from the California Arts Council, from the National Endowment for the Arts, all of which can go to grants and funding in Sacramento County. And that's important to know because we do partner with the county and we are able to provide a certain amount for this particular grant because we do have generous support from the county on this. So we're able to grant countywide for this program. But most of our grant programs are located in Sacramento. We developed what we call the Creative Edge Art and Cultural Plan for Sacramento. If you've never looked at it, I invite you to go to our website and take a look. It's kind of what we call our, our guidepost for the work that we do here at the Office of Arts and Culture, and what areas we consider really important to the creative economy and areas that we can move forward in the next several years. So it really does prioritize what we feel like are the needs from our office into Sacramento County. We do programs for organizations, we do grants, and we invest in the creative economy. And we really do look at the creative economy in the broadest sense of the word. So in this case, we're funding nonprofit organizations, but we also fund for-profit organizations and creative businesses because we look at it as an entire ecosystem here in the Sacramento region. And we're really happy that as part of the city's overall strategy for COVID-19 federal relief support, the city's invested $10 million directly into the creative economy because we know and the city knows how devastating the effects of COVID-19 have been on nonprofit organizations. And they continue to have an effect on admissions and ticket sales and memberships and subscriptions and everything that you all have to deal with. So hopefully these funds can provide some really necessary and important relief over the next couple of years. Before we go on, I just want to very briefly talk about some other programs we have because I think it's important that people know what grant programs are out there. So one is the Sacramento Arts and Culture Match Program, and it's called IOB Sacramento. And it's a match program for projects by organizations and community groups to do real community-based programming. And we will match a program dollar for dollar. It's a crowdfunding program up to $15,000. So this is a really good program for maybe some of you out there, or you may know people in your communities who could use this kind of support. And we work with a partner called IOB in our backyards, and they provide a lot of support through the crowdfunding, and they actually manage the platform. So I want you to know about that. We also have a Sacramento Film and Media Grant. There's one that's open right now, and it's for filmmakers seeking funds for both production and post-production costs related to film projects in Sacramento. And those are rolling grants, so we open them periodically, and there is one open now. And we're going to be launching soon, probably in 2023, maybe mid-year, a guaranteed income grant for individual artists. And there's one that I didn't add to these slides, but we're really excited about the Capital Region Creative Corps program. It's funded by the California Arts Council, and we have a grant for $4.75 million. And it's going to be launching in January and February, and it's going to bring nonprofits and artists together to work on messaging campaigns around climate mitigation, public health, civic participation, and social justice. So we're happy about those. And these are all on our website. So I encourage you all to go to our website, always keep track of the opportunities coming up, and sign up for our newsletter, because that's where you'll learn more about what we're doing. So now what we're here to talk about today. What is ARPA? So these grants are not from our regular general fund. They are federal grants. The city received Federal American Rescue Plan Act funds for COVID-19 pandemic recovery. And we are thrilled that the city allocated $10 million to relief funding for the creative economy. And again, because the city has acknowledged how important the creative economy, particularly our nonprofit organizations, are to the work that we do in the city and what makes the city and what makes the county great. So $10 million are going into relief. So what we've done is we've taken $2 million for 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and the county has matched that money with their $2 million of their money. So our pool for nonprofit 501c3s is $4 million. We have already allocated $2.7 million of those funds to organizations who have received our Cultural Art Award grants. those grantees have just recently gone through a really extensive vetting process and an application process, and have gone through peer review and budget review. So we were able to fast track their applications through the process. But we did want to retain $1.3 million for other organizations who either weren't eligible under that first grant or for whatever reason didn't apply, because we wanted to make sure that we could spread these funds out a little bit more widely. And just so that you know, because it's federal support, has very stringent reporting requirements and eligibility requirements. And we're just going to continue to emphasize as we go along that the city has its own reporting requirements that we normally have, but we're going to add a little bit extra on, again, because these are federal relief funds and they're all subject to federal audit. So we have to be really careful about how we distribute this funding. So what are they for? The important things is they are to retain nonprofit organizations that we believe are core to the creative economy in this region. They're really to expand employment opportunities at nonprofits. We know that staff and contracted artists and professionals have taken a big hit at nonprofit organizations, and we want to make sure that there's opportunities to keep staff on board or to hire new staff as needed, and to ensure ongoing access to arts and cultural programming throughout Sacramento County. We want to make sure that that continues and we don't lose the important organizations that we have. So what can these grants be used for? This is really important. There are so many ways that people can interpret how they want to use funding and what are some of the priorities in your organization. But again, because these are relief dollars and they're federal relief dollars, we're pretty tight on how these funds can be used. So clearly employee salaries, benefits, fees for artists or other contracted services that you may use with your organization. So not everybody is necessarily on salary, but if you work with contracted performers or whatever they may be, that can be used for that purpose. Operations, just general operations, your mortgage payments, your rent payments, your utilities payments. We're really clear that it's not about doing renovations or upgrades on facility or buying new facilities. Those are all considered ineligible expenses, but regular operations are definitely eligible. Insurance, that's become, we've heard from a lot of organizations that insurance costs have really risen over the last couple of years. So paying your insurance costs, marketing costs, which can encompass a lot of things, and also expenses for any kind of COVID-19 protocols that you may have. So those are really the universe of expenses that you can use this grant for. So who is eligible? According to studies done on a national level, these are the types of organizations in the creative economy who are considered to have experienced the most adverse effects from the pandemic. So first and foremost, you really must fall into one of these categories. So very clearly, theater companies, dinner theaters, dance companies, and musical groups, any kind of other performing arts companies and community arts organizations, however they're defined, promoters of performing arts, film or cultural festivals, and then museums, visual arts galleries, and something that we haven't added in the past, which are historical sites, zoos, and botanical gardens. So we have really opened up the universe of organizations that can apply and hopefully can fit more, fulfill more needs out there in the community. This is really important. You have to be in Sacramento County and Sacramento County only, which means that your physical location needs to be in Sacramento County. And if you don't have a permanent physical space, then your organization's office or headquarters must be in the county. And the work you should do should be specific to Sacramento. So, for example, if your work is primarily to tour nationally or internationally, and you really don't perform locally, you probably would not be eligible for this grant. You have to have current 501c3 nonprofit status. I've heard from other nonprofit organizations who are not 501c3s, and unfortunately, they're not eligible for this grant. So we are going to really need proof that you have 501c3 nonprofit status, which would relate to the categories we showed above. It's really important that you're in good standing with state regulatory agencies. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at the application. But the Secretary of State and the Department of Justice for the state of California both have verification sites on their websites that help us look up a nonprofit to see if it's current with all its filings, that it's not delinquent on fees that need to be paid or paperwork that needs to be filed. And the city looks really carefully at that. And I know during the pandemic, things have happened and it's been really difficult for some organizations to stay current based on whatever might be happening with them. But we cannot even look at your grant application if we go to that site and check and find out that your status is delinquent, which means the good news is you have more than 30, you have about 6 weeks to try to work. If you take a look now and you find out that something is pending or something is a little bit delinquent, you have some time before our deadline. But once we hit the deadline, if you're not in good standing with the regulatory agencies, we can't give you any more grace than that, and we can't accept your application. And the last, that you need to have existed pre-pandemic. So we're looking at organizations that were incorporated before March 1st, 2020, which I'm sure is most organizations. There are some ineligible applicants. And again, this is just so that we're in keeping with the federal guidelines for nonprofit organizations in the creative economy that have been hit hardest by the pandemic. So ineligible organizations for this particular grant, unfortunately, are units of government or schools. So that would include public schools, private schools, colleges, universities are not eligible for this grant because they do have other sources of funding and other sources of support. News media organizations such as radio or public radio or television, we will be having a journalism grant program coming up in the future, so they would be eligible for that, but not specifically for this. If you are primarily an art service organization, you're ineligible for this application. And anybody who was a CA, it says CAC, and I'm sorry, that's incorrect, a CAA ARPA applicant. So if you've just gone through the review process as a CAA grantee, and you were awarded those funds, and I sent out the award notifications to everybody today, then you've already gotten your nonprofit funds and you're not eligible for this round of grant. This is just for new organizations only. So we will be asking for some evidence of documentation of impact. So we're going to ask you very specifically if your organization's primary mission, and it has to be your primary mission, it can't be just something that you do in addition to your primary mission, is to produce, promote, or engage in live performance, events, or exhibits for the public. And we have to be really clear, this is for public consumption and public viewing. Also, or if your primary mission is to preserve and exhibit objects and the sites of historical, cultural, or educational interest. And that's where some of our historic sites and our museums come into play here. We're going to ask you to demonstrate the continued impact of the pandemic on your operations. And we will also ask, and this is not a criteria, yes or no criteria to be an applicant or to be eligible, but we're just going to ask whether you're led by or predominantly serve one or more marginalized communities. That information is really important to us as an office, and we ask that in all our grant applications because we really do want to know how we are serving diverse organizations. The dates and deadlines. So the application is open, it's up and ready, and I believe there may even be applications in there. It opened on December 6th. Tonight is the day of the webinar. And the application doesn't close until January 30th. We wanted to make sure that you weren't going to be impacted by the holidays and that people could take some time with the application. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's a very short I consider it relatively simple application compared to some of the other ones we've done, but you're going to have until January 30th. Do I advise you wait till January 30th? No, the earlier you can get it in, and you don't have to rush it, but it gives us a chance to take a look at the application and make sure that it's complete. It gives you a chance to make sure that you haven't left anything out, which is going to make you then ineligible. So please don't wait for the last minute. And then we have to go through an approval process so that once we look at the applications, they have to be, awards have to be recommended, and then they're recommended to the Sacramento Commission, Arts Commission, but they will also have to go to the County Board of Supervisors. So that does take a little bit of time. We have to get on the calendars of those agencies. And so we expect the grants to be awarded sometime in March or April. And then we have to get the contracts up and running. And again, that takes usually several weeks. So I'm trying to anticipate that you'll receive your grants somewhere between April and June. And in many cases, the earlier you can put some of these pieces together in anticipation of receiving grants, the quicker your contract could go out. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So you're probably wondering, how much are you going to get in these awards? And that's a good and important question. Applicants will not request award amounts. You don't ask for a particular amount. Awards are going to be based on a formula, and the formula is going to include the size of the grant pool. So how many organizations apply. So it'd be different if, 10 organizations applied versus, 50 to 100 organizations. It's going to be based on the budget size of the applicant. So it's going to be proportional to your budget, and the total amount in the funding pool. And as we said, I think it's $1.3 million. I'm going to go back to that. And yeah. And grants may not exceed 45% of annual budget revenues. So some of these organizations that may be applying may have budgets in excess of $1 million or $2 million. Certainly, we can't go that high because our pool is limited, and we want to make sure that we give meaningful grants to everybody. So a grant's not going to exceed 45% of your budget, and they're going to be capped at $75,000. So even if your budget was 5 or 10 million, you would not receive any more than 75 per year. And again, it could be smaller depending on the size of the grant pool. Once you have been recommended for an award and they've been approved by the governing bodies, we start the contracting process. So the first thing is you'd get a notification of your award recommendation, and then we'd ask you to complete a budget worksheet. So if you were told your grant was $25,000, we would ask you to complete a budget worksheet where you would tell us how you intended to spend that money, which categories you'd apply it for. We always encourage you to use the categories that you're going to spend the money in quickly and easily. You also then go through the city procurement requirements. And for those of you, again, who haven't had a grant or a contract with the city of Sacramento, you need to register with the city as a vendor. That's something that you could actually do now, and I encourage everybody to do that as soon as possible. There is no fee involved. It's just some paperwork. Then you would have to get a BOT exemption. Usually organizations that register have to pay a BOT tax fee, but because you're nonprofit 501c3 organizations, you would apply for an exemption. And we need that exemption number again in order to enter a contract. Again, prove your nonprofit status, that it's up to date. And then we also ask for a liability insurance certificate. And that is something that often takes an organization a little bit of time to pull together if you haven't had to do it, but it's usually a general liability policy. If you have employees, then we ask that you also have workman's compensation insurance, and we would send you all the criteria ahead of time so you would know what you would need to do, but you'd have to have this certificate before you could even go to contract with us. There will be some extra federal requirements and obligations that'll be part of the contract, and we'll make sure that that's really clear to you all before you sign it. Just sort of one of the big things is that the federal government requires you to keep your documentation for this grant separate from your other documentation, so that you would have to keep all your invoices and your payment receipts, and I think it's up to 5 years in case you are audited. We would have to make sure that you could execute an agreement within 60 days of us sending you the contract. So it's a pretty, that sounds like a long time, but you'd be surprised, that's a pretty quick turnaround. And then once the contract is executed, usually an organization can receive 75% of the total grant amount. And again, as we said, these are over a 2-year period. So if you received a $50,000 award, remember it's 25 in year 1, 25 in year 2. Okay, so, briefly, this is the grant application process, and then we're going to take a look at it. But applications are completed in our grant application portal called Submittable. Everything is on our website, so how you get into the grant, you can find there. It's going to ask you some preliminary qualifying questions. It's going to then, and once you are able to qualify, then it will take you to the rest of the grant application, where you're just going to explain briefly the impact of the pandemic on your operations. We're going to ask where you do your program. So there's something called a location report that you're going to upload into the grant, so that we know the specific addresses of where your programs take place throughout a year. We're going to ask you a little bit who you partner with, so we can determine some of your community impact. If you don't partner, that's fine. But if you do partner, we do want to know who you're working with. And there are some questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about your staff, your board, and the community that you serve. And the attachments that we ask for this grant include the organization's 501c3 letter, your revenue and expense statement for fiscal year 21. And just so that you know, this has come up in the past, we have very specific formats that are acceptable for a revenue and expense statement. So most common would be the Form 990 that we would ask that you would provide and upload to your application. If your organization is required to have an audit, we'd ask for your audited statement. And only for organizations whose budget are under 50,000, can we accept just a very simple revenue and expense report. But this doesn't mean just an Excel spreadsheet with your expenses. We really want to see an actual revenue and expense report. And as I said, the program location report. So those are the pieces that you would upload to the application. And for questions, you can always email our staff at artgrants@cityofsacramento.org. Our guidelines are on our website, and that's where you can find them. And our application is also on the website, and there's the direct link to our application. And we'll put these slides up on our website as well. So I am going to look and see if there are some questions, and then I'll stop sharing, and then we'll take a look at the application. So I would like to know if the round 1 grant award amounts have been posted. Yes, they have been posted. You would go to the city website, and you would go to the meetings and agendas portion, and you would look for the Sacramento Arts Commission archived meetings, and on the report and the agenda for the meeting that happened on Monday, you'll see the amounts posted there. And remember, they still have to be approved by the County Board of Supervisors. So organizations know what the recommendation is, but they can't publicize it yet. Are you able to set? I'm sorry, we did not set up closed captioning. So whoever asked that question, let's see if we can get you information that's going to be helpful for you in the future. Can the Friends of the Library be eligible for the grant? We are 501. If you are 501c3 status And you do public programming, yes. Sorry, what does BOT stand for? Business operating, I believe it's business operating tax. It's basically a fee that the city charges for anybody who does business in the city, with the city, excuse me. But for nonprofit 501c3 organizations, you get what's called an exemption. So you don't have to pay that fee, but you've got to upload certain documents for them to give you the exemption. And then it has to be approved. Are applications received earlier than January 30th given preference? No, no preference at all. Are the applications reviewed all at the same time? Not necessarily. Excuse me, sometimes it's helpful for us to go through them as they come in. So we'll basically just look to make sure that you've met our eligibility requirements and the application is complete. And at that point, if you've done everything that we've asked and you are totally eligible, and we may have some questions about your mission or your eligibility, excuse me, then you would probably just go right through to the recommendation for funding. So this isn't like our normal grant applications where you go through a panel process and people are recommended through funding for that. We're doing it totally with staff. So I think those are all the questions that I see so far. I'm going to stop sharing, and Diana, maybe we could share the application.
I just want to make sure you can see that.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the home page for Submittable. So anything that we have live, as far as calls and grants are, they will show here. The one that we are applying for currently is this first one, the Nonprofit Recovery Grant.
And you'll see there is a little thing for the guidelines there, but I really encourage you to download the guidelines from the website and really take a look at them in advance. It's always a good idea, and then go straight to the application, excuse me.
This link right here will also take you to the full guidelines. This is just basically the introduction. Okay. And it shows at the top of every page on this site. Unfortunately, that's just how Submittables is set up. So this first portion is just your contact information. You'll want to make sure that when you sign up with Submittable, that the email that you use is the one that you have access to and that you check on a regular basis, because all of the communications will be sent to that specific email address. And once you're there, it'll send you to the eligibility questions.
Okay, so they're gonna ask you if you have a 501c3 letter, and you can attach a copy of it to the application. So you check that box. And here it's showing you the two, I mentioned the two governing bodies that really look at your nonprofit status, and there's a link to them so you can check them. You may think you're perfectly current and find out that you're not, because just something didn't get filed on time. So I really, especially the DOJ link, that's where I tend to find more issues with organizations. So check it first, and then if you feel like everything is good, then check the box. So once you've done that, it's taking you now to the application. You've sort of met the very basic requirements. So obviously just sort of standard questions, the who, what, where. Be really clear about your mailing address as being the place where contracts would be sent. There's often discrepancy about addresses, but we do need to know your physical address and your mailing address. They can be different, but if they are, we need to have both. And obviously information about who the grant contact is and who the organizational leadership is, because that's the person who's going to sign the contract. Your tax ID number, the date the organization was formed, and the date that you received your status, and uploading your 501c3 determination letter here. We need to know the fiscal year. So are you on a calendar year or a June fiscal year, or July to June, or a September to August? Everybody's different, but we just need to know that. Here's where you're going to upload your financial statements and give us your revenue. The revenue that you list should match what's in your financial statement, obviously. And here's the information about what kind of a statement we need from you and that you've attached it. And then it's just a checkbox about your eligibility. So what's your primary mission? Check whichever applies to you. At least one should apply to you, but don't feel like you need to check them all. This is just your primary purpose. And then we're just going to ask for just brief information about history of your organization, your mission, your core programs, who your target audience is, as specific as possible, and any new programs based on COVID-19. You have 5,000 characters. That's sort of the biggest character space. Don't feel like you need to use everything, but be as clear and concise as you can so that we really understand who you are and what work you do. And then just here's the question that we ask about the impact of COVID-19 on your organization. And, you know, be honest and open about everything that has affected you. Don't feel like you need to check. You don't get extra points or extra money for checking off every box, but really, you know, be honest with us about where you've been most impacted. And then we give you a range of what your financial impact has been. So if you're a very small organization, $5,000 could be a very significant impact. For some organizations, loss of revenue could be in excess of $100,000. And then we're going to ask you specifically to provide a couple of examples, specific examples of the effects of that you listed above. So for example, one person could say our liability insurance rose from $1,000 a year to $2,500. Our staff increased from, you know, expenses increased or doubled. Whatever it is, be as specific as possible, because this is what we use to make our case to the community at large, to the city, to the county. We want to show the impact of the pandemic on operations in our 501c3s. So use this as an opportunity to tell your story, because it can be very powerful. Then we just want to know about your normal community impact. It's interesting and also useful to know who you partner with. Do you work in the health or wellness space? Do you work with seniors or aging population, immigration populations, environmental issues, food, incarceration, any of those issues? And if you do, again, you're not going to be penalized if you don't, but if you do, please provide a description. Everything that's got a little red asterisk needs to be answered. So if you don't partner with anybody, but you still see that little red asterisk, put not applicable. As long as you put something in the box, it'll be fine. And then we're going to ask you to upload the location form. And again, that's on our website. And we want you to be very, very specific about where your programs are offered. So the types of programs and the specific addresses of the location, because we map everything. We want to know what the reach is of the organizations. If you offer hundreds of programs, I'm not asking you to list 100 programs, but if you offer hundreds, at least list 20 of your most prominent programs. If you offer only in one location, that's perfectly fine. If you offer 3 programs a year, that's also fine, but give us the breadth of what you do. And then finally, diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility. So we're asking you the number of staff, the number of unpaid staff, if you have permanent volunteer staff positions, and then how many identify as, and we've listed the different demographics. You know, I mean, we're asking you to self-identify. in terms of these questions. These are not mandatory questions, but they're extremely important to us, and they're really helpful as we build a picture of what the creative economy looks like and the diversity in the economy. So please, if you have information about these, please answer those questions. We really appreciate it. And then finally, if you serve predominantly or are accountable to one or more of the following communities, and I really ask you to be very specific about this. I've looked at applications in the past where it's an organization that serves just the general public. Like, we offer our programs to everybody who walks through our door, which means, yes, we serve all of these populations. That's really not where we're going with in this question. We want to know if you have programs that are specific to these populations. That's going to be more useful to us. Again, it's not, you're not going to get funding or not get funding based on how you answer these questions, but it's just information that we need to know as an organization, and it's going to be really useful as we build our programs. And then if your organization is located in or predominantly serves communities in a HUD qualified census tract or the Sacramento Promise Zone. And there are links so that you can see where those areas are in case you're not familiar and you may not know whether you do or don't. And lastly is describe the population that you're serving and how it's been impacted by the pandemic. So again, that's specific to if you serve a marginalized or an impacted community. And that's the application. So hopefully that doesn't seem too overwhelming as applications go. And as some of our past applicants would say, that's a pretty quick and easy application. It's just really asking you about what you do on a normal basis. So I'm just going to go look at the Q&A one more time and see if there are any other questions that I haven't answered. What if you were fiscally sponsored until 2/21, but now you have your own nonprofit status? I do believe that qualifies, Cynthia. We'd have to kind of know a little bit more information about how long you were in operation while you're fiscally sponsored, and probably have some backup information about that. But you can email me and we could look into that. Yeah, I do believe. Yeah, if an organization's been fiscally sponsored, yes. Again, it needs to be an organization that fits all the other criteria. So, you know, performing, exhibiting, primary purpose, those types of organizations. Again, I would ask you to check in with me offline because I don't, I just want to make sure as I check in with the city's grant, ARPA grant staff that I haven't overstepped. I believe for our purposes, that's probably okay. Would staff also be independent contractors? When we talk about, yes, they can certainly be independent contractors. We often look at staff as being, paid, benefited staff members, but certainly you could pay your independent contractors that are your staff under this grant. Will staff be utilizing a rubric for assessment and deliberation? No, this is probably, Jason, this is probably the only grant you will see coming out of our office for a very long time where there will be no rubric or assessment. This is really just to get funds out into the field where we know that there's just extraordinary need. This is really about pandemic impact and relief. So no, it's just going to be, as I explained, the formula is just really based on the pool of eligible applicants. And I know we're going to get applications where we're going to have to look at them very carefully and determine whether they've met all of our eligibility requirements. But once you have, then you get put into that pool for funding. And Justina, you were asking for Cynthia. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's the only fuzzy, but I feel comfortable with that. And I know that we've talked about that before, because I know during the pandemic, there have been some changes and there have been organizations that have existed for a long time and done really good work. And I want to make sure that we're not leaving them behind. So, yeah, thanks for asking that. So that's really all I have to say. We can absolutely, if you have any other questions about maybe what your eligibility is, or if you feel like you're still unsure about your mission and whether it falls into a category, please reach out to our email that we've posted, and we'll get back to you. As you're doing the application, if there's anything you don't understand or you need clarification on, again, contact us at the Art Grants email address, and we will be sure to get you information. If you know of other organizations who you feel fit this eligibility, I would encourage you to reach out to them and let them know about this opportunity. Again, we're really grateful to have these ARPA dollars, and this is probably all we're going to get for relief funding. And we know that the effects of the pandemic are going to be felt for some time to come. So we really want to make sure that we help as many people as possible right now. So if there are no other questions, I think we're good. And thank you all for coming.